I figured, being my first year doing my light show, that I would do a walkthrough much like everybody else does at the end of their season. I learned a ton from listening to a bunch of different people's walkthroughs and looking at them and everything, so I figured I'd go through and see what I did, share it, and then people can offer up any advice or thoughts they had as well. And I can walk through my thought process on some things. I have a lot that I'm going to change for next year, but this year's show was about 12,500 pixels total, give or take. Most of that had to do with a garage matrix and the mega tree over there, which we'll talk about. Other than that, you've got 20 Boscoyo 24-inch snowflakes. You have 6 spinners from Boscoyo. You have the 3 trees up top. You have 8 of the Boscoyo, I think they're the large mini trees. And you have 4 of their arches in the front. So without further ado, we'll walk up here. And these are the Boscoyo large arches, like I said. I use the same build as they report on their site. So each of these is down on a rebar in the ground here, but I also nailed these down over the bar just because we get such strong winds. Anybody who's been following Colorado, unfortunately with the fires we had this year, but you can see we get pretty regular 50, 60, 80, even 100-mile-an-hour gusts. So I wanted to make sure everything was down pretty solid on here. Pretty standard runs on these arches, so I just lined them up next to each other. 2 rebars each, plus the nails over there held them in place. These things never budged. Here we have one of the large mini trees, and the way I did these is I just simply put some PVC poles on the back end, and then I just used large rebars. I mean, this is overkill on these size of these rebar clearly, but it's what I had because I was putting some other pieces for Halloween on these. And then what I did is I just kind of zip tied these together, kind of seeing what would happen if this thing ever caught enough wind to pick up. But these things are pretty solid. I mean, even in all these gusts that we had and everything, not a single one of these left the ground. These are all running 100 lights plus 20 in the star, or no, 85 lights plus 20 in the star for 105 each. I'm running these as a pair, so I run 210 pixels per output on these. And then the 4 arches in the front are all connected, one output as well. So about 200 pixels running there. And so between the front yard, you have 1 port running the arches, and then 4 ports that run the 8 trees. And all those wires are on the ground, and they all run up into behind my porch. And I'll get to the controller here in a few minutes. For my verticals on the ground, as you can see, I'm running just a simple pixel strip from Boscoyo. This is the heavy duty stuff. So this stuff's really very thick. And this is what I used on the mega tree. I bought a roll of like 500 or 1,000 feet. I can't recall when I bought it. So I just used this. These are 2-inch facings running down, and they tie into a cement brick at the bottom. It's just an 8-pound brick. And it just holds it kind of steady from flapping too much. And to be honest with you, even in the gusts again, none of these budged, and they all held really well. Same here, another vertical. If you're inquiring about the wood frame actually held my spider web for Halloween. So I kind of built that across there and had it hanging from the top. So that's why those are there, just as an FYI. The spinner's running between each of these outputs. So I run, I think, an 8-foot, 2-inch spacing. I think they're 50 pixels for each vertical, plus 85. So I run 185 on a port, usually, on these. and I had them strung across here as well. Here's another one that ran up. And then last, over on this side, is the last verticals with the spinner running up there as well. Okay, continuing on. If you look up top, what I did to hang snowflakes this year is I built this frame, and it's basically two pieces that are, I want to say 10 foot wide, maybe 8 foot, I can't recall. And to be quite honest with you, if I can zoom in a little bit, they're just held up there by these simple, if you look over here, right up on top, that's just a simple clip, a plastic clip that you got at Holiday Coro for the 1/2" PVC. And they're held up like that, and then I just zip tied, as you can see, each snowflake to a different area on that, and it worked well. They held perfect. They're not held up by anything else. The PVC is not screwed into the soffit or anything. Yeah, they held really strong, and I run all 5 of those at 48 pixels each. I run all 5 of those on a single port, running across. One thing I did do incorrectly at the beginning is I didn't really plan out my ports, and so when I wired each of these strips on the verticals, I had the input output sometimes on the top, sometimes at the bottom. I'm not gonna lie to you, if you look at my wiring, that made for some very crazy wiring to go up and down. I didn't feel like pulling all the pixels out, flipping them and making them perfect again. I just wanted to get it up. And so there was a lot of inefficiencies, but even with all these extra runs of wire, I had no problems at all with flickering data or anything in all these. So these worked really solid. Next we'll go in here and just check out the controller that then is running all the front yard and most of the front of the house that we just talked about. So in here is the main controller that is running basically the whole front yard plus most of the verticals and the spinners that I showed. The snowflakes, I believe, and the last 2 vertical spinner are actually run off the controller for the matrix, and we'll show that in a few minutes. So this controller is just a C1500 box, I think, and fit in. This is based off Steve Nee's design, so that's exactly where I built it from. And I'm running, as you can see in here, 2 of the newer smart receivers. Both of these actually run from, I think these ones run from an F48 in the garage. There is, I'm trying to remember, there are 2 that actually run, and we'll get to that in a second, that run from the F16 instead of an F48, and I'll show that in a few minutes. But this controller controlled basically the front yard and verticals and some spinners. I think the total pixel count is what, 200, 800, 1,000, maybe 1,500 pixels running out there, give or take. I don't recall. I tried not to power inject anything this year. I had the controllers, I had the ports. I found no reason to do it. But that said, with the larger display I'm planning next year, there's a good likelihood that I'll end up power injecting just to save having to build far more controllers and everything. Each of my controllers then ran off of this simple timer, and that's plugged into the AC outlet, and that's where that extension cord is running. Those timers I got off of Amazon for, I don't know, $5 or $7 a piece, something like that. They weren't bad at all. So I just set those up, and I set every one to turn on a minute later than the other, just so that all the controllers didn't come on at the exact same time and hit a surge on my circuits or anything. Not that I probably needed it, but it just felt safer and easier to do. So that's why I went ahead and did that. Next, I'll move over towards the matrix here. So this is, I bought a Tune 2 sign. This is the smaller version that you can get at Gilbert. and worked really well. I was able to scroll tune 2 across there, but to be honest with you, I also added another sign because some people didn't see the tune 2 sign, or I had to put that matrix in every one of my songs because I didn't have it running independently. I had it running off one of the ports. You can run it off independently if you have an extra any one of these simple controllers, but I chose to kind of just run it off a port. But I had this sign there and I had this one. Next year I may build a permanent sign specifically to those numbers that I want to use, and just put it maybe at a different location or something towards the front of the house so it's visible all the time. I may even just use AC lights, to be honest with you. Just plug it in and have it as a permanent sign that's on. So we'll see about that. If you come over here, then that is the controller I used for the matrix. And back up here, this is my garage matrix. And the ladder there, I'm going to be going on the roof in a little bit to show you some more stuff. This matrix, I just built a frame out of 1-inch conduit, I think. I can't recall exactly. And this is 8 foot wide and about 7 foot tall. And Boscoyo mesh at 1.5 inch spacing, I believe. So it came out to like 3456, I think was the pixel count, something like that. And that runs all the different ones. I planned it to go out and back so that every one of them ended up on this outside here. And then I just sort of zip tied the wires a bit together and then ran it drooping over to here. And later on I'll show you how I store this. As you can see, I built this on wheels, and I wheeled this out every night and wheeled it back in the morning or in the evening, depending how I felt about that, going outside and at the end of the show. And also, if you look, worth interest, I didn't cut the ends. These are running 100 lines, but they only run out and back, and they leave 8 at the end. I didn't cut them. I didn't want to cut them. I want to be able to use this. They actually may swap this out for a bunch of other stuff this year and go to a P5 matrix. So this goes, now I have 100 count strings still that aren't cut. And all I did was program them in the controller to have 8 nulls at the end. It was pretty simple and worked really well. And then I also used these sandbags. So when I put this up against the garage at night, I would put a sandbag at this position and a sandbag at this position. I also pulled this close, and up here in the garage, I pulled the matrix much closer, and I kind of just used these NRS straps to keep the top from being able to go forward and tip. I'd rather tip against the garage than tip forward and fall on the ground. So I just kind of tied to the very top, and that kept it up. Probably overkill. This thing really didn't ever move, but a couple times when we did have some strong winds, it did have some flex. So here's the controller. I have it covered up because we got finally a foot of snow. So here is the main controller that we have here. And if you look, this is running the F16V4 with an expansion board out here. And as I was saying, right here, these two run lines up to the roof that run 2 other smart receivers, and we'll get to that box here in a little bit. But basically, these this thing's set up really well where you can run some smart receivers off it just very simply. So here's your input from the Raspberry Pi, and then here's your 2 going to smart receivers, plus the other 32 channels, ports that I can use here. And as you see, I've labeled, so this is F is the Falcon itself, 13, and then I labeled them E for expansion 10, and then on the outside put the same numbering for each one of these as well, so I knew where it was coming. The only downfall is you had to do some math because I didn't label the expansion as ports 17 through 32, but expansion 1 through 16. So you just sort of have to add 16 to each of them. It's not that hard to do. This build again was based off a build from Steve Nee, who, you know, has a very similar build to several other people in there. I don't know if I need these fans necessarily, but we did have really warm weather this year compared to most. We were in the 50s or 60s for most of November and in December. So I would say, you know, it wasn't a bad idea, but the boards never really got all that hot. And I just have this hanging from, again, self-arrest straps that are run through down here and back up, and then they kind of twist onto the handles, and this thing just held hanging right there the whole time. 19 of the ports are used for the matrix, and then I use, you know, 4 or 5 other ports. I can't remember exactly how many. They run basically up to the snowflakes again and across. There's about 250 on that run, roughly 240, I think. They run the vertical, they run those horizontals, they run the spinner out there, and a vertical in the garage and a vertical again on the edge of the house. So, and they're also, like I said, they're running these 2 verticals here and here, and they're running the spinner there as well, just because of locality. It was just simpler than to try and run a line into there from the box. So if you're wondering what this pipe is, I decided, instead of just having cables just flat on the ground and then running up the side here and trying to tape them, I just used the 10-foot PVC and ran the 2 cables through them that go to the Ethernet cables that run to the box and the controller up top. And so that's how I set that up. And then my other power line is running there, and again is on a timer, and that runs to the controller that's on the roof that we'll get to in a little bit. And then in a second here, I will climb up to the roof and I'll show you the controller on the roof. Plus I'll also show you how I mounted, if you're curious, how I mounted the these horizontal against the roof line. And that's on all horizontals on my roof. I chose this magnetic system that worked pretty well. I'm switching to icicles next year, so that'll all be removed. And but if people want to know, I'll kind of pinpoint that here when I get on the ladder. I'll see if I can't get a good picture. But I used these magnets, and it worked really well to hold that up against there. And you could just pull that pipe right down then when we're ready to pull it down. Okay, we're up on the roof now. There's 3 trees. Each of these trees holds 250 pixels, 52 pixels, I think. And on this one here, I have a frame built to the, and have conduit, electrical conduit, basically bent to the angle roughly that I wanted for the roof. And I was nervous about the wind. These things are like a sail, so I didn't know what it would be like. And so I have literally 200 pounds of sand on this wood that we built that has these little friction pads on there. And to be honest with you, that's probably way overkill, but these things never budged. Again, we had some really serious winds this year, and there wasn't a single thing that went wrong with these. So it worked. Probably overkill, but it worked. This one over here, I literally just found a height that I needed, put a 2x6 on the bottom with some boards running up the back, and literally I just screwed these into the trim on the window, and that's basically it. They're not, the board down here is not held into anything. It's just literally, I think, 3 screws on each side that are into there holding it. But most of I let it sit and have all the weight down at this point down here prior to screwing it in, so that it wasn't like floating. But it worked really well, and there was no issues whatsoever with that. Snowflakes, again, if you look up here, just literally they're held by a plastic clip up there. I think there's just 2 per snowflake on there, and then it's just zip tied, and they're not even, these things can rotate like pretty easily. And again, throughout all this wind, those 2 clips held them in perfectly fine. There's probably a way more efficient way I can run all these. And again, first year, just sort of wanted to get it up and make sure it worked. But I have a lot of thoughts for next year on how I'm going to do a lot of this. These snowflakes are going away, and they're going to be actually mounted to the garage, I think, for next year is what I'm planning. And I'll be putting icicles across these horizontals. So much of this setup is going to be changing. I'll probably pull all of those clips out, fill it with some caulk or weatherproof caulk or weatherproof silicone or something each of the screw holes, just so the water can't get in there too much, and then maybe paint them over. On the verticals over here on the roof, they're held together by clips once again, and I'll show that at this location's a little easier. So right in here, you can see there's a clip about every 1.5 to 2 foot. And there's another one up here, right there. And those are again just the Holiday Coral plastic clips with a mounting from Boscoyo. This stuff, I think it's the 4mm, 2-inch spacing, and they're just put on there. For next year though, I'm gonna redo all these. I'm gonna use, I think, the Gilbert Engineering vertical mounts, and I'm gonna build standoffs with magnets, and I'm gonna connect those so the standoffs will have a 2-inch, because I ran into, as you can see from here, angling problems trying to turn this flat against there, because these were so close and all the wires, I didn't really realize that. To be honest with you, it wasn't horrible from the street, but I could notice. Most people couldn't because they didn't know what to look for, but I noticed. It kind of drove me insane, but decided I had done enough, got it up, and was happy with the initial outcome. Back here then, like I said, is the receiver, or the controller. Again, pretty simplistic. I'm literally just running 2 more newer smart receivers, and I labeled all the inside and outside, which ones come out for what Ethernet. These things held up. The box just stayed right up here and didn't really get much weather at all. I mean, it's pretty tucked up based on the way the roof line is, so it was pretty well protected and it held up. So next I'm going to walk over, closer look at a few other props on the roof, but then I wanted to show you the magnetic system I used to hold the horizontals up. Okay, so for the horizontals, see if I can get a good picture of this. I'll go this direction. Right here. So if you look right up in here, there's a metal magnet, and there's this bolt through here, and it holds the flat end of the magnet onto the PVC, and then at the top up here is a piece of the magnet. Now these were rated at 80 pounds, I think, each. And so I literally just put the correct drilling holes, and just so you know, I would highly recommend you build some kind of a template or something for drilling holes, because if you're even off, then these magnet flat ends will rotate ever so slightly and they won't lay flush. Here's another one. It's a better way of seeing. I can pull this one down. As you can see, it takes quite a bit of force to get this thing to pop down, but there's the top, and underneath, see if I can get, there's the magnet, and it snaps right back on there. You can hear it. It clicks pretty hard, and those things were, I mean, they were held on there with no problem. Never budged. I didn't have a worry ever that these top were going to go down. Okay, the last thing we're going to do then is walk over to the mega tree, and this guy is 14 feet tall to the bottom of the star, basically to the topper, and then a 3-foot Boscoyo star on there, 270 node star, I think, and then there are 48 strands of 85 lights each, 2-inch spacing on this tree. The bottom is not perfect spacing. There was a lot of little things that I ran into in general, but I will walk you through this process here shortly. I just wanted to give you kind of a bird's eye view of it. Okay, that's my mega tree. So first off, if you're looking at this, you can see maybe it's not as apparent, but there is definitely a slight bend at the top leaning forward. There's twofold reason for that. One of it's the tension of pulling the front ones down, and I don't put any guy wires on the very top topper. The other thing is the way that this ASAP pole is set up, and I could be completely wrong on how they set this up. It was hard to tell for the Mini, since I was only going to 14 feet, or the Junior, exactly which way to put it, but I think I used 1.5 inches followed by inch, or 1.25 inches and an inch for the two rigid conduits, one on the inside and one on the outside. But all in all, you'll see I have 4 positions for guy wires, and I have 8 guy wires. Again, you're going to see why in a little bit. But the way I set this thing up, that center pole all the way up, even under 80 mile an hour, 90 mile an hour gusts out here that we had not too long ago, and sustained 40, 50 mile an hour winds, this thing never budged. I mean, there was no harmonics, no wave, no bending. That pole didn't even flex on the middle, the way this was set up. So we'll go over that in a second. This is run, here's an Ethernet cable, and I'll go over from the garage here in a little bit. It runs out the garage down here, and it runs through the snow. My 2 power cables are up on a separate circuit outside, and everything runs out to here. And inside under the tree, I have basically another one of these big ammo boxes. This is all tied up and everything held together, but this is running 2 F-16, or sorry, an F-16 V3 with an expansion board. And that runs the entire tree and the Megastar. Each 170 run gets a port, and then the Mega Tree, or the Megastar at the top, runs a cable up the middle, and that literally gets 270 on a single port. No flickering, no nothing on any of these. Now, again, like I said, this is run off an ASAP pole, and down here, hard to see, but basically down in the ground, hopefully you can kind of see it down there, I put a rigid conduit with a connector. I buried that just by hammering it in, basically 18 inches into the ground, and then screwed via a connector down there. The other main pole, this guy here, I just connected the two at that point in the ground, and then ran this up. And the first guy wires sit right there. Those are about, I think, 8 feet up. Again, this is about a 14-footer, and they run out, and each of them runs out to a base here. These are those penetrator, I think they're called, earth anchors. They're literally these giant screws that are 18 inches long. This is pretty hard clay here, and to get each one of these, there's a yellow one. I put the orange on the corners because of being near the walkways and everything. They stick out. I didn't want anybody to trip or fall or stumble on it or anything, so that's why those are on there. This one is tucked back in the yard, so I didn't put anything on that one. But those things, I took a, which drill did I use? Can't remember which drill. I'll have to find it and I'll get a video of it. But I used, I think, 350 pound or a 700 pound. And basically these things, if I tried to use a regular hammer drill or anything like that, this thing didn't budge. They went in about 4 or 5 inches into this clay and then it wouldn't move. I used these other drills and it was like butter. They just went straight into the ground. Highly recommended. And I got that off, again, asking the questions on the support group, and everybody kind of responded with the same idea, and they worked really, really well. As a matter of fact, for my trampoline in the backyard, I used 24-inch ones of these, and these things all went into the ground with no problem whatsoever. And I bought these, came with each one of these penetrators, the earth anchors, and so I bought these already. And then I'm using these clips here, and for tensioning purposes, each line gets its own. Each one of these rings is rated at, I think, 500 pounds, 450 pounds, something like that. And I bought all these wires and then tensioned them up after putting them to the pole and bringing them down. And then you tension them on there with these almost fully extended, not quite. You just tension this, you run these out, and then you tension this, and then you can use this to tighten them down. And you can see, I mean, these aren't in there like extremely tight, but when you take all 4 of them, or all 8 of them from around the edges, it turns into being extremely stable. The second one, when we extended the pole, so you can see from the middle here, when we extended the pole up from the top, the pole's extended about another 5 feet, give or take, from the top of the, or 4 feet from the top of the pole, 10-foot pole. And so I ran another guy wire up about halfway up that pole, and that's where the second guy wires come through. All these are then held on by grommets at the very top and some J-hooks. And then they're tightened down, believe it or not. I just left a bunch of holes down below, and I used 10-inch nails. So I don't even use a round basic or I just used 10-inch nails and drove them straight into the ground at the whatever tension that it was perfect. You can see one of them is a little loose there. But all in all, this was pretty good. And I used a square ruler to measure distance between each one of these, and just sort of ran it from there. So I started at the midpoint. That's why there's 2 pieces of tape on there. Those are the 24 and 25. And I kind of angled those where I wanted it facing, as you can see with the star. So it's not facing straight, but it's sort of slightly angled. And then from there, I just ran them out each direction. And this worked really well. Again, none of these lines pulled up during the winds. They're definitely off and too wide. Next year I will tighten these up. I don't even know if I'll run 48. I may only run 40 or 42, but I'm definitely going to tighten the spacing. I'm highly considering switching this whole system out and going to a Atos, because I don't feel that for where my mega tree is going to be, I mean, it's never going to change because there's no other real good position in my yard. I don't think that it's worth going much higher, so I might just get a Atos system. It's a little bit more steady, just a little bit better. And I'll just basically put that up. That hopefully can alleviate some of the problems I had. Nothing major, but enough to make me worry a little bit at times. But when I saw how well it held up under the wind, there was no real issues. Just to get a closer look, this is how I put the guy wires on. So they're just held together with hose clamps. Those kind of locking carabiner type things. And then the guy wires are connected to them. There's the other ones, and then the other guy wires are up, measured again to be up there. And like I said, this, throughout all the winds we had, there was never any harmonics on the main pole. Never bending, flopping, nothing. It held really well. So all in all, the system works really well if you build it correctly, and you don't really have to attach anything to the top. As a matter of fact, based on what I've seen and read, most of the harmonics, if you attach to just the top, you basically got like a big, think of the pole as a big guitar string, and if you get any flexing to it that starts to happen or rocking, it can create a waveform that can get out of control. And so we just found that doubling up on the guy wires like this worked way better. Talking to some friends who are engineers and things like that, this is kind of the system that they employ, and it's solid. Like I said, 70, 80 mile an hour winds, no problem. 90 mile an hour plus sometimes. Sustained one day, sustained 40 miles an hour for almost the whole day, and this thing didn't even budge. I think the star turned a little bit at one point. That was about it, and I just went up and tweaked it a tiny bit. All in all, though, another little tidbit hard to see, but I'll get under here. If you look, right, let's see if I can get my, if you look right there, at the end of my finger, there's a little bolt at the top of the first pole that's drilled through the middle of the second pole that comes out. That bolt, I lowered the pole from the winch. I lowered it down on the winch here so that the weight hits that bolt, and then just tightened it up a tiny bit so that there's still weight on that bolt, but there's also weight on the topper plate as per the instructions from the ASAP Junior. So both this outside conduit pole is pushing on the topper a little bit, but most of the weight rides on the bolt actually in the middle, and that's worked really well all in all. So no real problems there, but again, I'm not 100% sure that I would stick to this system going forward. I'm probably going to change it out a bit just to get a bit of, now that I know the size I want and everything and what seems to work really well. I'll probably end up going with the Matos system, or to be honest with you, the other thing I might do is just buy the thicker conduit for the ASAP pole and just do 2-inch and 1.5 inch in the middle instead of doing 1.5 or 1.25, whatever it is, and then 1 inch in the middle. So anyway, the last thing to do then is I'll go into the garage and show where my brains of the operation is, and that's it. Oh yeah, one last thing outside. Said I'd show you how I stored the matrix. So the matrix just basically on wheels goes up against the house like that, and I just use the sandbags to hold it up. The reason the sandbags are there is I had, if you look, these straps here that wrap around the huge brick, but there's one there and then there's usually one back here. But what I found is when we really had those winds, this thing actually pushed and it ended up tipping that way like that. So the whole end kicked out until it fell on the wood, but was held by those straps. So then I just added the sandbags there too to keep the bottom from kicking out. But again, the system's not bad. This works, and you can build any size matrix like this or build halves and put them together, and it would definitely work. It was just, again, a pain going in and out all the time. If we forgot we needed to run an errand and the show was going, I'd have to run outside, get the car, move it halfway open, get the car out while people are watching, put the matrix back. I don't know, it just kind of got old. I guess I could have left my cars outside. We chose not to do that all the time. I'm probably going to put a P5 kind of centered on this pole right here next year, about halfway up. And then these snowflakes that are up here, I'm going to put them all on the garage door or do some other kind of orientation on the garage door. The garage door actually, with those magnets I showed, I tested it. They actually, those magnets hold pretty well. So if I attach, I mean 4 would be overkill, but if I attach 4 per or even 3 per snowflake and put it on the garage, I mean, it'll hold. The only thing I got to figure out is what my clearance will be up there when it opens and shuts with those on, and then kind of reconfigure if needed. I may have to pull the trim that's on there out and paint and to give it a little bit more clearance, so we'll see. While we're in here, this was where the brains of my show was. Yes, I didn't put these in a box. Probably should have, but I was last minute for this. I realized I needed to run to 2 more receivers, and I just sort of jimmy rigged this up. It worked fine. Next year I'll probably kind of tear this down and rebuild this to be neater and maybe have a box, because I'm probably gonna, with all the pixels that I'm gonna run on some high def props, I'm gonna use that 48 a lot more. But all in all, it worked. Again, I'm using, just like on every plug, I'm using these timers. They worked great. There was 0 problems. I ran a ubiquity switch out here, or Unify, whatever you want to call it, switch 8 outside. So that runs here. That's just running. It's not connected to my home network or anything, but that's used to run all mine. So the Raspberry Pi here, Pi 4, plugs into this, and then this plugs into This this controller here, and then the other two lines run to the F16 V3 and the F16 V4 out there. This is my FM transmitter. It worked perfectly fine. Actually, I followed the Virtual Christmas Summit, had the video on how to tune it correctly. I followed that. I basically downloaded that 100 megahertz, I think it was, and just made a 30-second clip on repeat, put it on there as a sequence and threw it on, and then went to my car and tuned it. It worked really well. We live in an area that almost every station's taken, so everything was poor, even for the best stations. But it worked. It worked solid. Some days you didn't get the best reception. If you moved your car like 5 feet forward, you would get it, but maybe I could build another antenna on there for next year or something. I don't know. I had an electrician put 4 plugs out here, so this is 2 separate lines running here, independent lines, 20 amp circuits. I have those there, so 4 of them, 4 outlets there, 4 on the other side of my garage if I ever need it. So they're running right there. This actually is not even plugged into anything right now. So yeah, so I ran that there. And then outside we had, I had an outlet over here that was on the ceiling, that those are plugged in, and I had 3 more outside that I never used, but I put those on individual circuits as well. So I've got more than enough plugs now to run the show. So anyway, that is pretty much my setup. This is like this, if you're wondering, only because I had 1 timer running all of those. And those were just the FM transmitter, the Raspberry Pi, and my Ubiquiti switch. So I figured these don't really do much, pretty easy draws on all of these. So I have them all in one extension that plugs into the timer. I could buy 3 more timers and put all the timers in there and have all those turned on. I didn't see a reason to do that. Maybe this is bad, I don't know. Then this one here, this guy is on its own timer and its own switch or outlet up top. And so that's how I had it set up. That's it for the show. Hopefully this will give some people some thoughts. I'm happy to hear what people had or any questions, and look forward to next year.